As the world demands more content, it's becoming harder to know which paths to take to reach your audience. Whether you're a full-time marketer, business owner, or content creator, the amount of constantly changing information can be overwhelming. Hi, I'm Ellie Puckett, the CEO of Resonate Recordings. We are a premier podcast production company serving over 3,000 clients with 16 shows reaching #1 on Apple Podcasts. Here on the Resonate podcast, we will cover the cutting edge of all things content and marketing. We demystify everything about podcasting, social media, SEO, and even generative AI. Join us as we explore the success stories and challenges of people just like you, and walk away with actionable steps to help your content resonate. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Resonate podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Mull. He is the founder of Boss Better Leadership Academy and the host of the popular Boss Better Now podcast, which was recently named by SHRM, SHRM. He was named the can't miss show for leaders. And just to put that in perspective, he was named alongside of podcasts like Brené Brown and the Harvard Business Review. So Joe's podcast is super legit. Joe is also the author of 3 books, including No More Team Drama and his latest, Employalty: How to Ignite Commitment and Keep Top Talent in the New Age of Work. Joe has also appeared as an expert multiple times on media outlets that include Forbes, International Business Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, all the letters, and Good Morning America. So I cannot wait to hear from Joe and speaking about commitment in the workplace. I think a lot of our audiences is business owners, but I also want to talk about how you took your background in leadership development and really turned it into an entire platform and became a thought leader across your space. Let's just jump right into it. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Goodness, when I'm having a rough day and maybe not feeling so good about myself, I'm going to go back and play back all those nice things that you said about me. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm a really good cheerleader. So if you ever need something, just give me a call and I'll be like, look at all the things that you did.
Thanks for that.
So I'm really excited to talk about your new book and everything. But first, can you set the stage and tell us, how did you get here in the first place?
Yeah. So it's funny. My story is, I think, somewhat similar to a lot of other folks who start their own businesses, especially in a thought leadership kind of space. I was previously the head of learning and development for the outpatient division of a very large academic medical center, a top 10 U.S. healthcare system. And in my work there, I was really focused on leadership development and was doing a lot of work with frontline and mid-level leaders, teaching them how to create the conditions at work for people to thrive and to really just develop their skills. That was the work that I fell in love with. And every job I'd ever had up to that point was really putting me in front of a room. I was designing and delivering programming in some format. Maybe it was training, maybe it was orientation programs for students at a college, things like that. And I had heard for years that I had a knack for that. I had a knack for being in front of rooms and translating complex ideas into simpler things that people could use. I would probably still be in that role with that healthcare system right now, except one day in February of 2013, we all got pulled into a room and were told that our entire division had been eliminated. There was a massive reorganization taking place. And off to the side, they said, Joe, we love you. You're an asset. We love your work. We want you to stay. We're going to try to pay you the same. We're just going to move you over here. Over here was not the right fit for me at all. Mm-hmm. So I started panicking and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I had a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old at home, and I was the primary earner in our house. And long story short, I sort of realized if the people inside this organization were so thirsty for what I was doing, and I really do have a knack for it, maybe there are other folks out there who would be thirsty for it. And so I had 4 months to get my house in order. And in July of 2013, as my wife and I say, we jumped off a cliff and we started a boutique training and development firm that was really focused on teaching leaders how to be better bosses. And that was 11 years ago.
That's amazing. I am becoming more and more convinced that all great entrepreneurship stories start with a layoff.
They might, yeah.
I was laid off also while pregnant with our second child. We had a small other child, our older son. I think that is kind of this impetus for good people who are passionate about what they're doing to finally get the kick in the pants to be like, no, I love what I'm doing. I'm going to keep doing it, or I'm going to do it this different way. So I love that that's a part of your story. I've heard many entrepreneurs start that way and say, here we go. Here we go. I'm going to make my own path. So I love that. 11 years later, you started in a corporate kind of background teaching people. Talk to us about that transition into the small business world. When did that become the mega media empire I feel like you've built at this point?
Well, there is no empire here. It's me. I have one full-time employee and I have 2 or 3 part-time folks that help out as well. It doesn't feel like an empire.
I'm going to call it an empire because you have been wildly successful. And as long as you're making enough money to feed your team and your family, it's an empire in my book.
Oh, Ellie, and it's so spot on. I'm so blessed. And I feel I just sit in immense gratitude for having discovered this kind of work. So one of the things that was so critical to me getting to where I'm at right now was I found a community of people who were already doing it that just poured into me. A month before I started my business, I wandered into a local meeting of my local chapter of the National Speakers Association. And that community was really built on a foundational value of abundant generosity, which is, as speakers, coaches, consultants, trainers, the pie is big enough for us all to be successful. So let's help each other. And that has made all the difference in terms of me learning how to launch and build and grow a professional speaking business, because that's really what I am. I'm a professional speaker who uses a variety of platforms to teach and to work in service to the cause that I'm all about. And some days it's podcasting, and some days it's keynote speaking, and some days it's training, and sometimes it's writing a book, but they all fit together in this sort of little Joe Mull ecosystem that we've built around this idea that we are on a mission to fill workplaces with better bosses, because an employee's boss is the single most influential factor in the employee experience. Early on in that journey, as I was learning how to do this, my business was very training focused. About 75% of what I was doing was workshops and seminars and partnering with organizational development and learning and development folks in organizations, especially in healthcare, because that's where I had come from. But as the years went on, I really fell in love with keynote speaking. And little fun fact, my bachelor's degree is actually in music and theater. And so keynote speaking is a perfect marriage of all the stuff I love to nerd out about around the social science research, around what makes people love work and do a great job at work, with the performance aspect of that. And so over the years, my business has really evolved to be about 75% keynote speaking, and the other 25% is events and workshops.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that's kind of how some of us find our way into that space. I was a collegiate athlete and I love that performance aspect. And I remember growing up saying that God didn't give me the ability to sing because I would like the stage too much. And it turns out I could still get to that stage through keynoting.
There you go.
But it's around a passionate thing. And for me, it's often entrepreneurship or building podcasting and building a brand. For you, it's around leadership development. So let's talk a little bit let's dive into leadership development. We have plenty of our audience who own businesses, who are leaders of other human beings. Give us a little bit, especially about employalty. We hear all the time this concept of people don't want to work anymore, this younger generation. And I just feel like it's kind of on a repeat. It's an old phrase that was said differently when I was entering the workforce. And it turns out millennials are actually just like workhorses in just a different way. And now we're just repeating the same old thing around Gen Z. So tell me your perspective and about your book.
So the book, we analyzed more than 200 studies and articles on why people quit a job, decide to join a new employer, or decide over and over again to stay with their current employer. And we discovered that it becomes much easier to find and keep devoted employees if you're winning in 3 areas of the employee experience. We call them ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. So if you think about the best and the worst jobs you've ever had, you probably sort your answers to that question into either bucket based on 3 questions. How did that job fit into your life? Did you find the work meaningful? And what was your boss like? It turns out that's the internal psychological scorecard that we all have that determines whether we join and stay and care and try. And of all the research that we did for this book, my single favorite finding was from a researcher out of Canada who studies generational tropes. And he found that exact phrase that you used, Ellie, "no one wants to work," showing up in North American newspapers every year going back 120 consecutive years. It is among the most persistent generational tropes in human history. As a keynote speaker, I will often tell the audience, hey, folks, I hate to break it to you, but everything that frustrates you about the people coming in behind you, all the complaints you have about them are the same complaints people had about you when you got here. The truth is that when you hear somebody say no one wants to work, that's not true. It's just that no one wants to work for them.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely
not the same thing, right? So the book really makes the case that for the past few decades, especially here in the United States, work has transformed into something that encroaches into every corner of our lives. Burnout is at an all-time high in the workplace. We work more hours a week than every other developed nation on earth. We take fewer paid vacation days than every other developed nation on earth. And wages have remained largely stagnant for the median U.S. worker for almost 40 years. So work is harder and more stressful and less rewarding now than perhaps at any point in the last 2 generations. And when you look at why people are changing jobs much more enthusiastically, it's because they're looking for an upgrade. They're looking for an upgrade to their quality of life. For some people, that's better pay or a better commute or a better boss or more fulfilling work. But that impact on quality of life is what's driving so much of the turmoil in the labor market. So what we say in the book is if you can create a more humane employee experience, one that doesn't negatively impact a person's quality of life, you become a destination workplace.
Yeah, I get that. I think that we've even seen that with our team at Resonate. We have quite a bit of flexibility. When the world shut down, we went fully remote and we've stayed fully remote. And I'm not saying that's how it'll be forever and always, but especially when we look at our audio engineering team, there's not necessarily a really good reason to ask them to come to an office every single day to sit silently with headphones on as they edit audio. And so that has allowed for some of our team to have flexibility as they have kids enter or kids who have special needs. We've been able to create an environment that's worth staying at for years because of that meeting the flexibility to the job.
Yes.
And that's not just about good boss, because I've had jobs that have been flexible who have had terrible bosses and jobs that have been inflexible that have had great bosses, which then has made someone want to stay somewhere longer and put up with maybe less meaningful work because it fits into the life well or because the boss is awesome. You end up writing a couple of books, and this most recent one, Employalty, is it really around this concept of these 3 items that you were talking about?
It is. When you write a book, the people who do this professionally and who understand what sells books will tell you that you title the book for the problem that people think they have. And then when you write the book, you really uncover the root cause of the problem that they think they have. So when you look at a book title like Employalty, on purpose, we want the potential reader to think that it's a portmanteau of the words employee loyalty. But it's not. We define employalty as a mashup of the words employer loyalty and humanity. Employalty is the commitment that an employer makes to a more humane employee experience because that's what activates commitment at work. When people come to work and that job fits into their life in an ideal sort of way, financially, schedule-wise, workload-wise, when they come to work and they find the work meaningful, it has purpose, it aligns with their strengths, they experience belonging on their team. And when they have a great boss, which is someone who trusts them and coaches them and advocates for them, they look around and they go, wow, I want to be a part of this. There's some really great stuff happening here. This is where I'm supposed to be. And they say, let's go. When people's commitment goes up, their effort goes up. And when effort goes up, every metric you care about as a business owner or as a leader is positively impacted. We talk about creating a more humane employee experience, and that sounds soft, but it's not. It's a business imperative. Understanding the conditions at work that lead people to join and stay and care and try is the entry fee for success in this wild work landscape in a post-COVID world.
And I think that maybe that was like people's awareness of that grew. We were probably a little bit on a trend of people requiring more or feeling less loyalty to employers because employers don't necessarily seem to have that loyalty back to the employee anymore, especially in the tech world, which is my native world, where you see mass layoffs on the regular as almost a part of the economic strategy. And so it is a funny thing.
I think that's a really important point that you just made. One of the myths that we debunk in my keynote, my Employalty keynote, is that so much of the Great Resignation, as it's been called, was triggered by COVID. And it wasn't. We actually can go back to the Great Recession in 2008 and see that when the U.S. got its economic footing under it in 2009, we started every year after that seeing more and more people voluntarily quit their jobs. And what they were doing is they were leaving a job to go take a better job. In fact, every year between 2010 and 2022, more people went looking for an upgrade than the year before. And so what's really happening isn't that it's the Great Resignation, it's the Great Upgrade. And what really bends people's noodle is that we were going to have 50 million voluntary quits in 2022 here in the United States, whether there was a pandemic or not. So this wasn't triggered by COVID. This was a generational shift. There's a massive recalibration taking place around how work fits into people's lives that started more than a decade ago. COVID just took an already exhausted workforce and broke it and continued as an accelerant for people looking for better work circumstances.
That's interesting. And I think about my childhood, and my dad was a vice president of a construction company. He started as a laborer. He's not a college educated person, and he worked his way up through the ranks. He was there 40 years. So my career path has been odd to him as I've made lots of moves and lots of adjustments, but a lot of them were not of my own doing. Like programs ceased to exist or companies. Now, I was living in the technology startup world, so it's obviously a lot more volatile. But when we look at those differences, because it was construction, when he went home, to some extent, he was at home. Now, the higher up he climbed, the less true that was. But that hasn't been true at all as technology has grown over those years also. So technology is walking with us. That's for better or for worse. But that separation or that work-life balance or people don't want to work anymore. Well, you used to go home and work actually stayed at work. And so there was a better work-life balance. There was a better opportunity for a stay-at-home parent that took care of everything. Whereas in my house, we've always been a two-income household because how else would we afford anything?
How else can you make it? Absolutely. And at the same time, we've seen workloads completely shift. We've seen organizations who have gone in for what they call right sizing or who are committed to quote unquote efficiency. And what's really happened is work that used to be spread across 3 people, then went and got spread across 2 people, and then got moved to 1 person. Mm-hmm. And so our expectations of what 1 person can reasonably accomplish in a day or a week or a month have shifted significantly. Managers, for example, have 33% more direct reports right now than they did just 5-7 years ago. At the same time, employers are continuing to try to operate with minimum staffing thresholds. What are the minimum number of people I can have to run this business? Workloads have exploded and they're getting less and less help. And so it's no wonder that burnout has continued to be at an all-time high. We can't take vacation days and people are pushing back and saying, enough, I want better quality of life.
That's awesome. Okay, but now for you, we've got this multifaceted problem. And so we can zoom out and be like, oh my goodness, how do we even begin to address this? It seems like you have really focused on making better individual leaders. Tell us a little bit about that and like the Better Boss Academy and how that plays into your overall business strategy and helping make better bosses.
Yeah. For years, I was really known in the leadership development space. But as you know, with branding, Ellie, you have to figure out how to communicate what you do and how you do it in a way that people remember, that's kind of sticky. When I get invited to speak about the journey that my business has been on, when I describe our brand, I think a powerful brand is both a problem that people have and a solution that they desire. I also think your brand is what you're known for knowing. When we look at people who think about how do we position our brand, we often will talk about a positioning statement, right? I work with blank who are struggling with X to achieve Y. In that positioning statement, we get the pain point and the transformation that people desire. But in this day and age, we almost don't even have time for that. Right? What's the 1 or 2 words that you want to be associated with what you do? And I think for a lot of people starting out, they resist it being the category of services that you're in. Or, for example, I have a speaker friend who has built an incredible career doing customer service training. Customer service, that's what you do. If you ask, what's Lori about? Or, oh, what does she speak on? Or what kind of training does she do? If you say customer service, that's it. I understand who she is and what she does. And as her brand has evolved, she has moved from being known for the category that she's in to being known for some of the sticky intellectual property that she has written. Take, for example, people out there like Patrick Lencioni, who has written a whole bunch of books, but is most known for a book he wrote called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Mm-hmm. When he was starting out, he was known as an organizational development guy and maybe specifically a teamwork expert. And so for years, he was an expert in teamwork. Now, when you say Patrick Lencioni, what do you think of? 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And so his brand has evolved from the category that he's in to being that kind of sticky intellectual property that he has. And so back to us, we were thinking about that, right? Like the idea of being in leadership development or in retention, for example, is kind of generic. And so we decided a couple of years ago to plant our flag in the word commitment. There are a lot of people who play in the employee engagement sandbox, and that's really the stuff that I nerd out around as well. But that term has become a little bit overused, and it means different things to different people. And so we were looking for a different way to say it. And so we landed on the word commitment. And for a year, we didn't publish a single thing online that didn't have that word in it. That's a hashtag. It was the name of some things that we were doing. It was the name of a keynote that I was doing. And as we did that, we ended up with a tagline: commitment comes from better bosses. This became the one sentence way that we put forth our value proposition. People would say, what do you do? I speak and write about commitment in the workplace. And when we had that tagline, commitment comes from better bosses, that better bosses piece started getting attention too. And one day I was on an airplane and I sat down in my seat and the gentleman sat down next to me and he said, are you going home or are you going to work? Which, by the way, is a great question on an airplane. And I said, yeah, I'm just coming from work. I'm going home. He said, what do you do? And I was tired. And I opened my mouth and I didn't get it right. I said, I teach leaders how to be better bosses. And he immediately turned and laughed and said, we need that where I work. How do you do that? And we ended up having an amazing conversation. And I started playing with that. I teach leaders how to be better bosses. And every time I said it, people would lean forward and say, how do you do that? Or they would laugh and say, we need that where I work. And that really became the centerpiece of the brand, this idea of better bosses. And so we've swapped it around when we launched our Boss Better Now podcast. We launched our Boss Better Leadership Academy, which is actually evolving and changing now into something a little bit different that we're going to be rolling out later this year. We created our Boss Better email newsletter, and we have a Boss Better question of the week that's on our social media platforms. And so we've created this kind of little branded ecosystem around the work that I do with a singular concept, but reaching out into a variety of platforms and methodologies.
It sounds like you took a very strategic approach to how you built the branding around it and the business. So can you flesh out just a little bit more of the pieces? You just said you've got the podcast and the academy, but also how did you get to this place where you decided what was your toolkit, your media set, where you were going to lean in and produce this amount of content?
So I think there's some phases to this. So phase one, early on in my business, was I was trying to get hired for speaking and training. And one of the things that you figure out quickly is no matter how great you are in front of the crowd, people who have only seen you once are not going to remember your name. Even if it's 3 weeks later and you just did a killer workshop at a conference and they're sitting in a meeting room and somebody says, we need to find a speaker for this thing that we're planning, your name does not come up in the top of their mind. They might remember, hey, there was that guy that I saw and he was pretty good, but what was his name and how do I find him? And so early on, I knew that content marketing was a really important component of what I was trying to do. How do I stay on people's radar, stay top of mind, and remind people who might be interested that this is what I do and how I do it and what I do it around? And so almost from the jump, I created an email newsletter. And that email newsletter was not about promoting me. It was about solving a problem that the audience that I wanted to work with struggled with every day. And so fast forward 10 years later, I still do a monthly email newsletter. That is, we treat it like continuing education for leaders who want to be better bosses, but don't always know how. And we mix in a little bit of fun and a little bit of video and a little bit of me and a little bit of other sources so that the followers can feel like they're keeping their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the world. This is a way for me to stay top of mind. So that was one kind of content that I've continued to remain committed to. And then over the years, Ellie, I've experimented with other things. I'm a speaker, so video matters. So we added a YouTube channel. And for a while, I was doing a direct to camera how-to video based on questions and challenges that my audience has. Then when we decided to experiment with a podcast, which I had been asked about repeatedly by followers, do you have a podcast? And you should think about doing a podcast. And I will tell you that it took me about 3 years to decide to do it because I did not want to do the kind of typical podcast format, right? Joe has a guest, he interviews the guest, that's the podcast. It just didn't appeal to me. And my aha moment around my podcast was, what if it was like a morning drive time radio show where people could tune in for 30 minutes or 40 minutes and hear updated news around what I talk about, what's going on in the world, but also some recurring segments and bits and things like that they could maybe contribute to. And so that was a light bulb for me. So that's how we built the Boss Better Now podcast. And it's why it's been so much fun to do. But let me zoom out for a minute because I think this might be maybe the most helpful thing that I can contribute to folks who are listening and wrestling with this. A couple of years ago, I was at one of our NSA conventions, and there was a speaker on stage who said, forget being a speaker or a coach or a consultant. You have to think of yourself first as a business owner. And as a business owner, if I ask, what's your marketing plan? You better be able to answer that question. And it struck me like, yeah, I know there's some things that I'm doing out there to try to make the phone ring and to try to drive traffic, but can I articulate it in a very specific way? And so I went home and said, all right, let me look at all the things that people in my space are supposed to do or are trying to do in order to market, in order to be strategic about it. And I ended up making a list of 8 strategies. What are the 8 ways to drive traffic to a business? And my list of 8 are digital marketing, content marketing, public relations, prospecting, speaking bureaus, referrals, and repeat business. How do you figure out what to do and when to do it is you look at which of those strategies make the most sense for you or for your business. And then you choose the tactics that make the most sense for you and your business that support those strategies. So for example, the first 8-9 years of my business, I did no PR, zero, zilch. But then I had this new book coming out and we wanted it to go to another level. And so we decided that was where we were going to invest new time, resources, and effort. And so we ended up working with a PR firm. And over the past 2 years, that's how I've ended up in some of those publications and TV networks that you read off at the beginning of our interview today. So it is strategic, picking from a menu about what makes the most sense for you and your business.
Yeah, and I think that you can add one at a time. Like you're saying with the PR agency, you hadn't done it. You got a hold. You didn't have to do everything all at once. You got a hold of the newsletter, and then you added a podcast in a way that felt authentic and fun for you. And then you added books that needed a PR agency, and it became this engine that feeds each other, because I'm sure that your PR appearances on CBS only help your speaking, and
right.
Your speaking helps your podcast, and your podcast helps bring you new clients to the academy. And it just is this engine that keeps going, but you added one thing at a time, and you did have a concerted marketing effort and strategy that you followed to just push it forward.
Yes. And I will confess, I've constantly been in this wrestling match between, do I add or do I switch? And what I mean by that is, if I'm doing those regular YouTube videos and growing that YouTube channel, and then we decide we're going to try a podcast, do we add the podcast on top of that, or do we switch what we're doing? And I was at a place professionally where I just didn't want to add. I didn't want to add more staff. I didn't want to add the resources that come with adding more staff. So we treated it as a switch. We still did videos on YouTube, but they were videos of the podcast episodes, right? So we did a little kind of a swap there. The other part of that is my podcast has been on a little bit of a hiatus recently because we're doing more PR, we're doing more interviews in other platforms. One of the things that I will continue to wrestle with is, how do I fit it all in? One of the things I'm trying to remind myself of is that I don't always have to know how to do something. The question I need to answer is who, not how. If I want to grow my podcast, if I want to do more PR, instead of trying to figure out how to do it, I need to figure out who knows how to do it and then partner with them and invest time and resources into them so they can help me get there.
I do want to jump on something that you said, though, because I happened to notice that your podcast was on a quote unquote hiatus. But it's not exactly. You're repurposing old content right now. So the content engine is still flowing. You might not be putting the effort in for new content. You might not be recording new content right now, but you're still putting valuable content in front of your audience. And you've given them a clear timeline. You're saying, I'm taking a little bit of a break, but we're still going to bring you value. Here are tidbits from the YouTube channel that we had that you may not have been exposed to, and you're posting them on your podcast channel right now, which is, I think, brilliant because you're not actually turning the faucet off. You're just adjusting the faucet to make time for yourself. And you said that also about YouTube. When you quote unquote turned off YouTube, you didn't turn off YouTube. You adjusted so that you were still posting to YouTube with podcast episodes.
Yes.
And so you kept the engine going just differently, or you optimized for your time as a leader. And I think that's something that we all need to understand and do better is like, how do we keep this going while optimizing that? I still need work-life balance as the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
We're not just looking for work-life balance for our employees, but we need it as human beings, period.
And thank you for noticing that. And I think one of the other things that I've wrestled with for years is there's an idea that I tend to make things complicated. Okay, so we created this, and so how do we make it better? We could add this and that and the other thing. But there is a beauty in simplicity. And when you keep things simple, you end up optimizing them and getting really good at them. And that just impacts quality in all the positive ways. And so for me, I think I spent a lot of time figuring out what are the one or two platforms that I want to get really good at. And so for a lot of years, it was this email newsletter that we do. We've really worked on LinkedIn, and we've really worked on the YouTube channel for a time, and we worked on a podcast for a time. And I think I spent a lot of years trying to figure out how to get the people who were trying to follow me in some of those other places to join me over at the place where I wanted to be the most, right? So how do I get my podcast listeners on my email newsletter? How do I get people who are following me on LinkedIn to go watch things on YouTube? And of course, there are ways to do that, to cross-pollinate traffic and content. But what I've really come to understand is that people prefer to consume on their platform of preference. If you're a podcast listener, you're not going to stop being a podcast listener, or maybe not even start being a YouTube person because I asked you to move over here with me. If you want to learn from me or stay connected with me or follow me, I need to be showing up in the places and spaces where you prefer to be. And so I think that's one of the things that in my business we have continued to try to figure out how to get good at is how to be in all of the places and spaces where people want to connect with you in a way that is meaty, in a way that is not just sufficient, but is meaty, but that doesn't have me working 90 hours a week. And that is sort of the ongoing struggle, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, on that, you've talked about adding a PR agency. What does your support team look like? Because you talked a little about the fact that you're a lean, mean fighting machine. You got a couple part-time people, you got one other full-time employee and yourself. So tell me a little bit about your support apparatus at the moment.
So it's a mix of full-time people and part-time people and some contractors and some agencies. I have a full-time, full benefits and salaried person who has worked for me now for 3 years, though we have known each other since high school. So there's a long-standing relationship there. And I'm very lucky to have her. Her name is Jamie. And having her is like having two people. She's just one of these people who can just carry a lot. And so I've gotten very lucky. I've gotten away with probably having more help from one person than I should. I also have a part-time tech and instructional design person. Her name is Tiffany. She's brilliant. She catches anything we throw at her. Maybe we need to do some updates on our website. Maybe we're creating a new lead page for an event that we're doing. Maybe we need to create some educational materials on the back end to support the book launch. She helps with all of that, which has been great. I do have a great relationship with you all at Resonate who handle the podcast and take care of all of that for us and have done so very well for a long time, as evidenced by the fact that we've been with you for 3+ years now since our podcast launched. And we have a couple other contractors like that we get help with. I have an attorney, I have an accountant, folks like that. We are considering bringing on an administrative assistant person as well. And then I do have an agent. I have a woman who helps with marketing me and selling me to different folks. And that's a newer relationship. We used to do all of that in-house.
And then the PR agency around when you are doing a book launch.
Yes. And the PR agency is a contracted services thing based on whatever cadence we want to work. So, for example, we did a 4 or 5 month engagement with them around the book launch in the 3 months before the book and then the 2 months after it launched. And then we took a little break for 2 months because it was summer and everybody goes on vacation. And then we went back and did another cadence with them in the second half of 2023 and into the first part here of 2024. We're on a little break with them right now, but we're thinking strategically about it, right? There are some times in the calendar when we want to ramp back up. So we will go back to them and say, all right, what are the news topics of the day? Where do I fit in? Where do I take advantage of an opportunity to provide expert commentary or to share findings from the book and the work that we do?
That's awesome. I love how you're talking about it in that strategic way and having some cross-functional people that help keep it all rolling. I think as someone becomes a thought leader, they really do have to think about the support structures and what they can put their time towards. And Resonate can take that podcasting part off of someone's plate. You still have to record your own content, but we can do everything else. That is one way that people can think about, how do I enter in to this space while optimizing for my time? But I have even played with this myself and had successes and some failures. I tried to let a company help with my LinkedIn, and it didn't sound like me. It just didn't sound like me. And so it doesn't mean I won't give it another try at some point, but I did pull that because I wanted my authentic self to be somewhere where my community lives. I think of myself as having a pretty strong LinkedIn community, and I just didn't love it not sounding and being like me. And so it's a trial and error practice, putting something in place and saying, this is working great. Oh, right now we're in summer months. Let's pull back on PR and figuring out what works for you as you build out your strategy of becoming a thought leader.
And to that point, one of the choices that we've very intentionally made about the middle of last year was quality over quantity. In the social media age where we have folks who are constantly vying for our attention, it's really easy to get caught up in, I need to be out there. I need to post something. I need to be out there. I need to share something. And we just intentionally thought, what if we don't post that often, but when we do post, or when we do publish an episode of a podcast, or when we do publish an email newsletter, that what we're doing is so high in quality and so useful to the person who is consuming it that the next time we post, even if it's not for a while, they go right to it because they see so much value in it. So we made this choice, for example, around our email newsletter. For years, I would post my email newsletter every other Tuesday. And that was the cadence for us. It felt like just the right amount. We felt like we did every week for a while. And I think people become a little email blind on that. But again, it depends on what you're doing. If you're selling widgets, you probably need to do more than once a month. But for us, which was really about sharing that kind of subject matter expertise content, we decided let's test drive once a month, but let's ramp up the quality of what we were doing, make it richer, make it more robust, play with the design a little bit. And we then taught our audience that this was the new way we were doing it. We said, you're going to get the Boss Better email newsletter in the middle of every single month. It comes every month, right around the 15th of the month. This is the email for the month. You're going to see this icon in the subject line every time. And then what we're going to do is 2 weeks later, we're going to send the in case you missed it email, which is just a summary of the bigger email that went out. So here again, we're simplifying the content a little bit. We've been doing it that way now for 5 months, and we have doubled our open rates from what they were before.
That's amazing.
Because people are now paying attention. Well, this thing is really good, and I only get it every once in a while. So when it arrives, they open it.
That's very smart because people are getting email overload. And so training them to know and also bringing the value, which I think is actually the most important point. You were talking about, hey, we're not going to post as often. We're going to post less often, but more value. And I think that we get into these fighting with the algorithm things and thinking that we have to play their game, when really bringing value first is actually what helps you the most.
And in service to them. And are you writing about yourself or are you writing about them? Are you talking about yourself or are you talking about them?
Joe, this has been the best conversation. I have loved learning about your business, your value that you bring, but also how you've risen in thought leadership. I appreciate diving into multiple facets of that. And so I just want to thank you for giving us your time and energy and what you've brought to the world and letting Resonate be your podcast production company. So thank you for all of those things.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you and your team for continuing to take such good care of us.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If it resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. Reviews are key to helping us grow and bring more useful insights to other people like you. If you have any questions about today's show, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at podcast@resonaterecordings.com. We may even feature your questions here on the show or answer them on social media. And as always, if you're looking to start or improve your podcast, reach out to Resonate Recordings. We want to see you take advantage of the strategic content engines that podcasts can create. We are here to help you. Just book a call directly on our website at resonaterecordings.com.